steel chainsaw as an example. I got to put my regular glasses aside here. So there's a couple factors that go into a chain and how it performs on a chainsaw. You've got your angle of approach is what we would call it. So that's your angle this way versus this way. Now if you get a electric sharpening chainsaw sharpener, it's going to have 3 different angles. It's going to have 25, 30, and 35. Standard is 30, which you see on most saws. Now, this angle right here determines the length of the cutting edge, okay? So that also determines the aggressiveness of the cut. So the longer this surface area is across here, the more cutting edge you have. So that's going to determine how aggressive it is. So this is a .325 chain. I wouldn't recommend any more than a 30 for this, because that would be probably too aggressive for the saw, the power of the saw to handle. So you don't want to do that. So some people will even go down if they're weaker, or maybe they're cutting softwood, they may go down to a 25. But standard is 30 degrees in this direction right here, okay? So what I'm filing these with is a 7/16 times 3/16, 3 millimeter. So on steel, there's actually a little line. Oh, getting ready to take you guys over. That hurt. Got my finger. See this? I'm just going to leave it in the video, because the bottom line is this is videoing. So look at that. It just took a really nice chunk out of my hand. And I'll tell you what the guilty culprit is these very heavy, these. I had them sitting there, and they decided to fall and take over the stand, because I'm in a rather tight area. That's a nice little bite there. So I'm doing one thing, not paying attention to the other, and I got me a nice slice because this chain is sharp. So, yep. Let me take a break real quick and grab a tissue. I don't need to be bleeding all over the place in the camera. A deep cut, but I will be a little more cautious this time. And I'll put gloves on. I normally don't have that issue, but I'm kind of cramped up here in a tight spot. And those little braces there, I didn't even think about falling over when I was moving the camera. I'm just trying to get you in close enough here, but not too far away, but not too close either. So, back where I was, we talked about the size of file. We talked about the pitch across the tooth, the surface area, the cutting surface area. So that determines how aggressive, that's one of the things that determines how aggressive a chainsaw chain will cut. Okay, so you have more surface area across here, the more aggressive it's going to cut. The other factor is pretty simple, and Husky makes a nice little tool, and you can get different ones, is your raker. Okay, so your raker is in relationship across the tooth like this. Okay, this pulls out your material, but it also determines how far down or how much of a bite that your chain gets, your tooth. So here's how, a lot of times when they say, like this one right here, you can see that tooth is a lot shorter than that tooth, because I have a tendency to file easier going this way than the other way. So it's, and I don't know, not everybody will have that problem, but out in the field. So what you do is you use a tool like this that sets the depth of your raker. So in theory, if that distance from the top of your tooth here, from the top of your tooth here, is the same on every tooth, that means that tooth, even though it's shorter, it's taken just as big of a bite as the other teeth. So if you are like me, I don't tend to be consistent unless I use my electric sharpener, which I do go back every once in a while and use my electric sharpener to kind of get me back even. Now, I guess there's a big debate. People are like, well, the length of this doesn't determine, you know, whether you got to go file all these down to be equal with your smallest tooth. Well, the bottom line is, just like when you're cutting a log, the small end of the log determines what you're going to get out of the log. Simple fact. So the smallest tooth on your chain really is the determining factor is how long that chain is going to last. So if you say, well, why would I waste and go shave these all down to the same length as that one? Well, it really wouldn't matter, because the bottom line is, when that tooth is gone, it's gone. It's not there anymore. You know, if you got a bunch of them, the rest of the chain is no good if you got teeth missing, because they're all too short on one side. So that determines the length and how long the chain lasts. So the smallest tooth is a determining factor as to how long your chain lasts. Now, another key thing that you want to keep in mind is, if you don't keep your raker relationship equal with your teeth cut, then what happens is your bar, two things can happen. One, you're running the motor a lot harder than you need to, and you're not getting good cuts, and you could be slicing or cutting crooked in the log, okay? And one of the biggest, probably most expensive things that you're going to have to deal with is you're going to wear your bar out. What's going to happen is, if your chain is in there running crooked to one side, because one side is cutting more aggressive than the other, and you are wearing the flat spot of your bar out, and you'll see it, especially right up in here. You'll see it all of a sudden, your chain's running. I can lift it up now. All of a sudden, your chain will be running crooked to one side or the other, and then your bar will be wore out. And I've gotten a lot of chainsaws I bought used or got from other people, and one side of the bar is just wore out. It's got a big curve in it, and the chain's riding in there crooked. And once you do that, that bar is pretty much shot, unless you take it somewhere and have them grind it so it's equal on each side, so it guides it properly. I mean, it's pretty simple. If you keep your chain sharp, you keep your raker right here, it's 0.063 lower than this, then the chain will cut straight no matter what the length of the tooth is. But what determines, actually there's two different things that determine the life of a chain, a chainsaw chain. One, obviously, is the tooth. If there's no tooth, then you shouldn't use it, or if it's really small, it can break off. Two is the play in the pins. Like, this is not that aggressive. This came off of an old chainsaw, but see, it moves in and out, and if that gets too much play, then you can end up breaking a chain or coming loose. A lot of times as well, when people are sharpening these, they'll get down and start filing the links, and they start cutting into the links, and if you cut into the links, then you can have a link break. So this chain right here, I'll have to see how many links are in it and determine if I can use it on another chain, or if it's another bar, or if it's stretched. But I have a bunch of those. People give them to me. They say it won't cut, and I get looking at it, and the rakers are all higher than the teeth and all kinds of stuff. So if you go through and file your rakers down, which I started doing on this, and it's pretty simple. Now Husqvarna has one where it says softwood and hardwood. Basically, that's going to determine how much of the raker it takes out. If you're doing hardwood, and especially on a .325 chain, I would not go down to the softwood unless you're just cutting pine, and you honestly are just doing cedar or pine, and you're not doing any hardwoods. If you take the raker down the full .063, then you're going to be really probably cutting more than your saw. You're going to have a problem with your saw bogging down. You're running it hard. You're going to run it hotter, and there's no reason to do that. But this works out just fine. All you got to do is file across it, I just lift it up so it's right there, and that distance under there is basically the thickness of that, which is the right length, and you just go through and file it off till it's flat, so it doesn't take anymore. And then that's done. I just go back and forth because it's hard to be in the way of the camera and do it. I need to be, but pretty much you just take it off till it's flat. That sets the depth that you need to have, and determines how much tooth is cutting the wood. So it's pretty simple. This is a aggressive chain that they call, the steel calls their aggressive chain. Then you have one that's like this right here. This is an X-cut chain, so it's their aggressive chain for Husqvarna. I love these chains. They cut really, really well. They got a lot of tooth to them. This is a .05 chain, so it's not. I don't have any of my 3/8 chains in here. These all use the .235. So these are pretty easy to take the rakers down. Now this is basically like an anti-kick chain, so it's got two rakers right there. So when you file it down, you got to take both those down. It takes a little more work. This guide really doesn't fit in there. I tried it and it just doesn't work with that chain. So I've done it. These have been taken down just by eye, and I can tell how aggressive the saw is cutting. And this is a little bit bigger saw. This is the Rancher 460. But on your bigger saws, so another thing you can do too, let me get that over here, is if you feel like you have enough power, and say like this 460 Rancher right here, it'll run a 24-inch bar. Say you want to go ahead and just put like an 18-inch bar on it. So now you got more power, shorter bar, but you want to cut a little aggressive. I don't recommend it, but you can. There's a line on all these teeth to determine. But if you have a saw, a power saw sharpener inside, you can go 30 degrees, and when you do that, you're going to have a lot more surface area across the tooth, but it's also going to make that little point right there softer because you're going to have more of a really sharp, weak, not as much material metal. So if you're cutting soft stuff, that might be fine, but if you cut through hard stuff, you hit knots or something, you're just going to end up dulling your chain really quick, so I don't recommend it. Now if it's the 3/8, there goes my voice, if it's a 3/8 chain and a bigger saw like the 660, the 380, you can get away with that, and I do that on a couple of my chains, and then I know, and I may change the chain depending on what I'm cutting, what material I'm cutting, and I usually label the chain with a little, little sticker. So hard to make it a short video, but I wanted to kind of cover those things because I see stuff back and forth, and somebody kind of questioned me on another video, and yes, your teeth can be different sizes as long as your raker in relation to that tooth is the same. Now, do shorter teeth determine whether the blade or whether the chain, how long it lasts? Yes, the teeth length matter, because if you have a short tooth, when that tooth gets down, does nothing, or is dangerous, the chain's, it don't matter how big the other part of the teeth are, the chain's done. So, it makes a difference. So if a person says, I want to go ahead just because I know it's right, if I go through and file it all equal based on the smallest tooth, you can do that too. But if you're out in the field cutting logs and trees down all the time, I get it. You can't run back to the shop. You make sure it's sharp, you take your gauge out, you do the raker, and you're back in business. I get that. But for an average homeowner, they want to keep it as simple as they can, and that's what I'm trying to teach them. So there's basically a recap. Sharpness of the tooth, okay, is important to get a good filing in there, and then the degree of file across the tooth. So the greater the degree, the more cut and surface you have, the more aggressive the tooth is going to cut. But it's going to leave a sharper point, so that leaves it susceptible to basically cutting and going dull faster. 30 degrees is what I recommend. You can go 35 if you move up to a 3/8 chain, and then even a 25. A good sharp chain with a 25-degree cut on a smaller saw, and that's usually like your battery operated saws and stuff like that, or your lower horsepower saws. They do like a 25-degree pitch, so it's not as much cutting area. And the biggest thing too is the raker. Get your raker set correctly. If you get your raker set correctly and you got a sharp tooth, you really don't need it to increase the degree of sharpening to have more tooth to cut, because then you're just gonna, like I said, you're gonna be dulling your chains a lot more. And because it's just a finer piece of metal right that tip, so it's just going to wear them faster. So I suggest 30 degrees on your cross cut, and keep your raker, depending on what you're cutting, 0.063 is a average raker height in relationship to the top of the tooth. If you keep those two consistent and you do your chain maintenance, then you will have a good cutting saw that you will appreciate. It'll cut straight. Since I do woodworking as well, there's other determining factors. Sometimes it can cause a saw to cut crooked. It could be sharp and everything can be right. That could be knots, hardwood, stresses in the wood can cause it. It's not always just the sharpness of the teeth on the chain. So you know, we go through that doing woodwork. We put a piece to a table saw or something like that, and it cuts crooked. So those are factors too. So it's not, if your saw is cutting crooked and you've done everything right, it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with your saw. It's simply you could be hitting knots or hard parts in the wood, softer on one side, vice versa. So I just wanted to make a quick video. It's really bad outside, cold and snowy and icy and melty and then freezing. I figured shop time was the best thing. I have to do these saws, you know, every once in a while. I take a day or two, go through all the saws, sharpen them, do the rakers, check the oil, clean out the guides, lube. I got grease up the tips of the bars and clean out the rails in the bars, getting any like excess oil and debris so that the oil will flow through the bar properly. And it's a nice thing to do on a rainy day or something. So if you got a bunch of saws or a saw, crank up the music or whatever you got to do and enjoy yourself. Take your saw and get it all fixed up and maintained, so the next time an ice storm or storm happens, or a tree comes down, or you want to go out and split wood, or you want to cut up wood, when you get there, the saw is going to perform in the way that you can get something done and you're not frustrated trying to, maybe if you've driven a long ways to go get wood or something, and then you get there and your saw's all messed up and you start pushing your saw and you get frustrated. Then you end up doing something you shouldn't be doing and being over hard on your saw because you're frustrated. This will help prevent that. So it's like anything, preventive maintenance, whether it be a vehicle, a piece of equipment, or even your chainsaws, even your pew-pews, you have to do proper maintenance to have proper performance. So it's like the 6 P's. Proper planning prevents piss poor performance. So proper maintenance prevents piss poor performance in this case. So I never know how to do a short video, and my voice keeps going. I never know how to do like a really short video. It's sometimes just hard. But then I like talking to you guys, and I like editing film. If I have like a 2-minute video, it's no fun. So I hope that helps somebody. I'm sure you pros are going to let me know everything I did and said wrong.